in this video, we will talk about the interaction between Seleucus Nicator and Chandragupta Maurya. And we will also examine what are the claims that are made in our history books concerning this interaction. So when we read our history books, we are told that after destroying the Nanda Empire, Chandragupta Maurya soon came into conflict with Seleucus Nicator. Seleucus Nicator was one of the generals of Alexander the Great, and after the death of Alexander, he took control of most of the eastern possession of Alexander's empire. Now it was this Seleucus Nicator that came into conflict with Chandragupta Maurya. The result of this conflict was the defeat of Seleucus Nicator, and apart from losing most of the territories in the northwestern part of the Indian subcontinent, Seleucus Nicator also gave his daughter to Chandragupta Maurya in marriage. And we are told that in return, Chandragupta Maurya gave some 500 elephants to Seleucus Nicator. So this is the broad summary which we read in our history books concerning this clash between Seleucus Nicator and Chandragupta Maurya. Now before analyzing these claims, I think it is important to first talk about the sources that are used to make these claims. And when we look at the sources, we find that there are no Indian sources that talk about the interaction between Seleucus Nicator and Chandragupta Maurya. Whatever information we have about this interaction comes from the Western sources, and these Western sources are also not contemporary sources, which means these sources were not written during the time of Seleucus Nicator and Chandragupta Maurya. These sources were written quite a long time after these events. Now there are some scholars who argue that these later Western sources have borrowed their information from an original source, and this original source was Megasthenes' account. Now we all know that the original account of Megasthenes has not survived in its full form. We have only fragments of information. So because of this, we do not have the original source behind this interaction. We have only the borrowed information in these later Western sources. So this is the main problem which we have about our sources concerning this interaction. Now about these later Western sources, we also find that they do not tell us the reason behind this conflict. But in my view, there were two main reasons. First was the desire on the part of Chandragupta Maurya to conquer the region of northwest. We all know that before this conflict, Chandragupta Maurya had already conquered the region up to the Indus River. Beyond Indus, there were Greek settlements, and Chandragupta Maurya worried that these Greek settlements could become a base for a future Greek invasion. And in order to mitigate this danger, the best response was to conquer the region west of the Indus River. So this is what Chandragupta Maurya tried to do. The second reason behind this conflict was the desire on the part of Seleucus Nicator to conquer the lost territories of Alexander's domain. We all know that Alexander controlled a large chunk of territory east of the Indus River, and it was this territory that was conquered by Chandragupta Maurya before this conflict. So it was this desire of Seleucus Nicator to conquer the territory east of the Indus that led to this conflict. So these two opposing interests, in my view, were the main reasons why this conflict took place. About this conflict, we find that our sources does not tell us the exact date when this conflict took place. But there is one Western source which does tell us that this conflict took place before Seleucus Nicator returned to fight Antigonus. So based on this information, we can argue that this conflict between Seleucus Nicator and Chandragupta Maurya took place around 306 BC. Now the same is also true about the location of this conflict. We have one Western source which tells us that before the conflict, River Indus was the boundary of the two empires. So we can assume that it was on the banks of River Indus that the battle between Chandragupta Maurya and Seleucus Nicator took place. Apart from this, we also find that these Western sources does not also talk about the nature of the conflict. By nature, I mean that they do not talk about how intense or the duration of the conflict. So we have a single Western source that tells us that the conflict went on until they, that is Seleucus Nicator and Chandragupta Maurya, came to an understanding. So here we can clearly see that the duration or how long this conflict took place has not been mentioned. Now about this understanding which is mentioned in this source that happened after the conflict came to an end, we find that our history books make three important claims. So the first claim is that Seleucus Nicator lost most of the territory in the northwestern part of the Indian subcontinent. The second claim is that Seleucus Nicator married his own daughter to Chandragupta Maurya. And the third claim is that Chandragupta Maurya gave 500 elephants to Seleucus Nicator. So let's analyze these three claims separately. Now, if we analyze the first claim, it is quite clear from the different Western sources that 4 satrapies of Seleucus's empire came under the control of Chandragupta Maurya. The area of these 4 satrapies were basically the regions of Herat, Kandahar, Makran and Kabul. So the first claim is, in my view, quite valid. But about the second claim, we find that no Western source explicitly says that Chandragupta Maurya married the daughter of Seleucus Nicator. Now, if we were to look at the Western sources, we find that there are 2 sources that talks about some type of marriage alliance. First is Appian and the second is Strabo. Now, as I have already said, these 2 sources are not contemporary sources. So, if we were to look at Strabo, we find that Strabo uses the Greek word epigamia. Now, this word could mean either the right of intermarriage or intermarriage. Now, Strabo does not tell us about the detail of this marriage agreement or the right of intermarriage. It does not tell us whether there was this intermarriage between the daughter of Seleucus Nicator or Chandragupta Maurya. The second account of Appian uses a different Greek word, and this word is kaidos. This word kaidos does signify an actual marriage, but Appian, like Strabo, does not talk about who married whom. So what we see based on these 2 sources is that the information which we have about this marriage alliance is quite vague. And because of this vagueness, we find that there are 2 views amongst historians. So the first view is that there was this marriage alliance between Chandragupta Maurya and Seleucus Nicator, in which Seleucus Nicator married his daughter to Chandragupta Maurya. Now, other historians argue that there was no such marriage that took place. Instead, this agreement allowed the intermarriage between Greeks and Indians. Now, there are some scholars who have objected to this actual marriage between Seleucus Nicator's daughter and Chandragupta Maurya by saying that we know from history only one daughter of Seleucus Nicator, and this daughter was not born yet. Now, about this claim, we can say that there may be some other daughter of Seleucus Nicator about whom we do not know, or Seleucus Nicator could have also married his niece to Chandragupta Maurya. So this objection does not really account much. But broadly, we can say that we do not have enough evidence to reject or to accept the claim that Seleucus Nicator married his daughter to Chandragupta Maurya. We only know that there was some type of marriage agreement that took place, but what this marriage agreement was, we do not know. Now, coming to the third claim that Chandragupta Maurya gave 500 elephants to Seleucus Nicator, one historian has argued that this was not the exact number of elephants that Chandragupta Maurya gave. He argues that in the Indian tradition, 500 is a stereotyped expression to suggest large number. So here the original source wanted to convey that Chandragupta Maurya gave large number of elephants to Seleucus Nicator, and in order to do so, he used the number 500. So here 500 does not necessarily the exact number which Chandragupta Maurya gave to Seleucus Nicator. Now coming to the main question, did Chandragupta Maurya really defeat Seleucus Nicator? I believe he did, because the territory in the northwest, which were earlier part of Seleucus's empire, now came under the control of the Mauryas. And we should also remember that after this conflict, the peace between these two powers lasted quite a long time. We know for a fact that after Chandragupta Maurya, no such conflict took place in the period of Bindusar and even in the period of Ashok.